we see clients of all different stages, some of which come here with they've already poured the concrete, they already have the rebar in, the foundation, and they're asking us to redo the floor plan. And it's like, well, it's a little late for that. We can be done, but it's difficult.
Welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Today we have the privilege to speak with Andy Schieber, who is a seasoned medical device engineer and entrepreneur with extensive experience in research and development. He is the founder and president of Ingenarious Consultants, a firm that specializes in early stage medical device development, offering services from concept to clinical trials. Andy has a remarkable track record in designing and developing Class 3 implantable medical devices and holds over 40 patents, including the Hydrus Microstent, which is a significant innovation in ophthalmology. And he also serves as the head of engineering at Rivermark Medical, where he contributes to the development of novel medical technologies, and his educational background includes a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Minnesota and a bachelor's in engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Stout. Andy, thank you so much for being with us on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Well, what made you decide to become an engineer?
Well, it's an interesting story. I kind of have a unique background. I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. So I spent a lot of time with mechanical equipment, driving tractors, and I had a lot of fascination for these sort of intricate mechanical systems. And most of the equipment, even to this day, is extremely mechanical. You've got cams and big rotary arms and all these things moving. And so I was always fascinated with that. And then I was, good at math. Both of my parents were math teachers. So, those kind of two things connected, right? So that's what kind of got me into the mechanical design in undergrad. And so that sort of evolved into being sort of an official mechanical engineering degree at the University of Minnesota.
Terrific. I remember recording one of the very early podcast episodes. It was probably one of the first 10. And I still remember the title of that episode was Farm Boys Make the Best Engineers. And I don't know what it is. I guess it's just, it's growing up and just fixing things on the farm, but it does seem like there are a lot of engineers, an inordinate number of engineers I've met that grew up on farms fixing things.
Yeah, it's true. When I was young and I was trying to get my first job, my dad said, just tell them you grew up on a farm and they should hire you because farm kids are hardworking and farm kids know how to solve problems and they can do things with duct tape and, wire, or whatever. And I always made fun of my dad for that. I was like, no, nobody does that. When I tell them I grew up on a farm, they laugh at me. So interestingly enough, when I got my first engineering job, one of the things that my first boss said, he said, yeah, Andy, one of the things I like about you is that you grew up on a farm. And I was like, are you being serious right now? Or are you just teasing? He's like, no, I grew up on a farm. I feel like farm kids can, manage the startup mentality. And again, I got into startups right away. And so, engineering is one thing, but startups is another thing, right? Being able to really formulate a solution without having a lot of resources is sort of inherently part of what you do as a farmer. And having not just the engineering and we're talking about the technical skill sets that you develop as, someone who's on a farm, but there's also all the other things. My dad is a biologist and an agronomist and a business person and he does his own taxes and, every single thing that you do on a farm is being done by one person, right? So you have this sort of really broad set of skills that allows somebody who has that experience to become an entrepreneur or become a business person, and in addition to understanding sort of the technical aspects of engineering. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you were growing up, did you appreciate or just even recognize the fact that you probably were developing a stronger work ethic than maybe some of your peers who did not grow up on a farm?
Yeah, definitely. I think even though, we didn't, traditionally, I guess in the historical sense, we didn't do a lot of farm work on, my dad had a small hobby farm. We had, 160 acres or so. About half of it was cropland. So it was mostly a single man operation, although we did help, me and my two sisters helped quite a bit, with, taking care of the calves and stuff like that. But I also had classmates in high school who, woke up every morning at 5 o'clock and milked cows before they came to school. I never had to do that. So there's a range, right? For me, I was sort of, an average or maybe on lower than average in terms of my engagement in terms of farm work, compared to the average farm kid. But compared to the kids who lived in town, who didn't have that, and what do they mow their lawn? I guess that was about it, right? So we did, compared to those types of people. Yeah, we did a lot of stuff. I mean, we have like an acre worth of grass to mow, and that's just the lawn mowing. That doesn't count, all the fencing we did and all the hay baling and unloading hay and feeding calves. And it was one of those things I learned when I became a parent, and I was reading about like how to deal with a toddler. And I have a 4-year-old daughter, and one of the things they said was kids view chores as games, and they don't realize it's work. So thinking back, they basically say, have your 4-year-old help you unload the dishwasher and put the laundry in the laundry basket, and they think it's fun. They don't realize they're being tricked into doing chores. And I feel like a lot of the stuff we did when I was a kid was not, we didn't see it as a chore. It was fun. I mean, feeding the calves was fun. We liked doing all that stuff, and we wanted to go out and play with Dad in the barn. We wanted to go outside and do stuff. It was especially boring after a while in the house, in the winter, and we would go out in the barn, and it was like a whole playground for us to climb in the hay bales and mess around with the cows, and we had a lot of cats and stuff. So it didn't feel like work, but it was later on it kind of segued into engineering. It's like, I want to do a job that doesn't feel like work. I want to find a job that really is like that, where it feels like I'm playing with stuff I like to do. So I think that made me be able to identify what I wanted to do for work a little bit easier than maybe the average.
That's a great insight. So, and in addition to the engineering knowledge that you're going to share with us, we've got Parenting 101 here as well for those of you with young kids out there.
Yeah.
All right.
It's fun. It's funny. One other little part of that is the things that you learn when you're a kid in terms of work ethic, and this is more about myself and less about my daughter, really seem to be difficult when you're a child being told to do something. And I have all these examples I'm running through in my head when my parents were telling me, hey, you got to go outside. Like when you're a kid, you just want to sit in the house and do nothing sometimes, and you don't want to have to do anything. And so if there's any schedule, right? Like, oh, you got to do this every day, or you got to do these chores, that becomes I guess sort of like this thing that's hanging over you, like, oh, I got to do all this stuff. I don't want to do this. I want to play. I want to do what I want to do. And so what I've found is that has translated into my career. And now that I'm, quote unquote, older millennial or whatever, and managing people who are younger than me, I'm just like, I know this isn't interesting, but just do it. Like can't you just do it? Like, just, I know it's not fun, but it will be fun when you know how to do it well and it's easy. And so I think there's a lot of those things that you learn in doing physical labor, doing farm work, having something at home that your parents, like my parents didn't really teach me that stuff. They just needed to get the farm work done.
Well, I had a guest on, Jim Cuseo, a few weeks back, and he had a really, I think he called it type A and type B fun, I think, if I'm getting it right. But the gist of it was, type A fun is like you're playing a video game, right? It's fun in the moment. And type B fun is, it might not be fun in the moment, but looking back, you realize, wow, that was a great experience, and I learned a lot, and overall, I had a lot of fun. And that's often the case with engineering work, right? Sometimes it is fun in the moment, but other times, like you said, you just have to grind through it and get it done. And when you look back and the project is finished and you've built this incredible thing and it works, then you're like, oh wow, that was really fun. What a satisfying experience that was.
Yeah, exactly. Engineering is extremely challenging work. So even if you get a fulfillment and an enjoyment from it, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. Like, why doesn't this work the first time? And now that I've been doing this for almost 20 years, it's like I just assume nothing's ever going to work the first time. And and so obviously and we're in business, and our goal is always to put together a proposal and plan that outlines what we need to do. And we got to kind of err on the side of having some averaging effect, right? Because it's like, okay, if we get everything right the first time, we can have it here, or if it never works until 10 tries, then it might cost this much time, and trying to figure out where that average is without having started, and really trying to figure that out, and it can be frustrating. So, but then after the project's all over, you're just like, yeah, it was easy. That seemed like, why didn't we figure that out right away?
Hindsight is 2020, huh?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your company, Ingenarious. Tell us how that got started.
Sure. So I was lucky and fortunate in my career to work at startup companies right from the get-go. So I was employee number one at my first job. Well, not employee number one, engineer number one at my first job. It was a company of 10 people, mostly senior, executive level medical device people. And then that company ended up not succeeding, and those same founders turned it into an incubator. So then I was able to be the first employee at their next company, which was an incubator that spun out companies. And then I went with one of the spin outs. So the main spin out that came out of Denali Medical was called Ivantis, is now owned by Alcon. And so that was my experience for the first basically 7 years of my career, from 2006 until I left Ivantis in 2014. To be in that situation, right? First employee, ground floor, whatever, design something from scratch, come up with these ideas. We're building the lab out. We're buying equipment. We're hiring people. We're going to clinical trials, and we're doing all that. And then kind of at the tail end of my time at Ivantis had been moving into clinical trials, and they didn't really, have a lot of engineering projects. I went to my boss and said, I really kind of want to do some engineering work still. But I'm not. I was doing surgical training. I was spending a lot of time in the field, helping out with the clinical trial rollout and training surgeons on how to use this glaucoma device. And I wanted to get back into engineering. So there was actually a company called Clairvista Medical that was invested with the same investors. And so I actually asked my boss, I said, hey, I heard about this company, Clairvista, startup company that NEA, New Enterprise Associates, had started recently. They're small, they don't have any engineers, can you connect me with them? And he said, yeah, sure. I'll connect you with, our board member, who is the board member over there. And sure enough, that turned into me consulting over there one day a week. And the reason why my boss wanted to do that was because he wanted to keep me on, because he knew I was sort of looking to go back to the beginning, right? I wanted to work at an early stage startup again. I wanted to continue doing that. I wanted to be at the very beginning of a project. And he knew that if I didn't find that at Ivantis, that I would leave and find that somewhere else. And so I started consulting over there. That was my first experience with consulting. So I was going over there one day a week, and kind of fell back in love with, like, wow, this is great. I really want to do this again, this like whole early stage stuff. And I started formulating the idea of doing that as a career, right? Like if I was looking for jobs in early stage startups, it would be extremely difficult because a lot of those companies don't survive. And a lot of those companies have difficulty hiring people. So like you got to be like the perfect fit, right? So it's really hard to recruit, your 1 or 2 or 3 employees for your startup that you're just getting off the ground. And a lot of those companies utilize consultants for a lot of that work. So I thought if I could do this on a consulting basis, maybe that would be, a career path where I could sort of, kind of a Peter Pan engineer, like perpetually at the startup level, like never growing up into larger companies. And so it took a while to sort of formulate how I was going to do that. But in 2014, when I left Ivantis, I had made a lot of connections in the ophthalmology world, and I went to a dental startup company at that point. And so I kind of kept forging those relationships with those ophthalmologists and with those other ophthalmic companies. I was still doing a little consulting for ClearVista. They had kind of gone on pause for a while, and I started working on a bunch of other startup projects. And so I started to get a little tiny bit of a pipeline for consulting work. It was small. I mean, I probably had 3 clients at the time that I was doing on the side. It was sort of a moonlighting thing, and it was only work that I could do. Like it wasn't large scale. It was just pure mechanical design stuff that I was good at, and prototyping and stuff. And I was utilizing vendors to do all that. And then I got an opportunity for a project that was larger. And so this one surgeon came to me and said, "We have a project here that is pretty exciting, and we're going to license this technology to these investors. Would you come meet with me and these investors and maybe kick off a project? And we need X, Y, and Z. We need all these different elements to it." And so I said yes without knowing how much work it was going to be, and then I quickly realized I needed to have other people involved because I wasn't going to be able to do it. Again, I was fully employed at the time still. So I connected with my co-founder at Ingenarious. His name is Randall Takahashi. I worked with him at Ivantis at one point. We worked together there. He had left Ivantis before me. We reconnected and we're talking shop over lunch. And I said, I kind of proposed this idea of this vision for kind of a startup company focused consulting group. That's a pretty underserved market. Most of the design services companies and most of the engineering companies that are doing services don't really target that market because those companies are challenging in timeline, challenging in budget. Sometimes the technology and the problems they're trying to solve are really, really difficult. And so a lot of the bigger companies sort of don't dabble in those smaller projects as much. And so I thought, we have an opportunity here. Would you be interested in maybe we should start a company? And so September of 2015, which is, we're on our 9-year anniversary now this year, we formed Ingenarious officially with that kind of charter. And his background was manufacturing. And so he saw the same vision that I was seeing on the kind of the design side, on the R&D side. He saw the same vision on the manufacturing side, saying like, yeah, the companies that are in the startup world have the same problems on manufacturing. They don't have resources, and they have a hard time getting stuff done because they don't have these capabilities. And we should also do that. And we hadn't done that at that point. We were just doing design services, consulting, but we had this vision for a lab that was going to be a job shop, pilot builds, that sort of thing. And so that was all kind of the framework for what Ingenarious was intending to be at the beginning.
Wonderful. Thank you for running us through that. So it sounds like Ingenarious was really kind of born out of your love for early stage startup work. And this is how you get to be a Peter Pan engineer, as you say it. Tell us about the name. That's an interesting name. Where did it come from?
Yeah, so my co-founder's wife, Linda, came up with the name. We were bouncing around a bunch of names, a bunch of horrible ones. Thank God we didn't pick any of those. And she suggested Ingenarious, and I said, "What is that?" She said, "It's Latin for engineer," and I thought you would like that because I was sort of I'm into that sort of thing. So I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. Yeah, it has real meaning, but it's also a weird word that people don't necessarily attribute to anything when they hear it. Like that's what they say about kind of branding. Like in some cases, you want your name to be clearly obvious what you do. I just got a water heater from the water heater company. So in some cases that's good branding. In other cases, it's like, you make up a word, Yahoo, Google, whatever, and that then you make a brand out of it. I like the ones that are kind of a little bit of both, right? They have a meaning to them, but on first glance, it's just a random word. And so that was kind of the underlying meaning there.
That's cool. I didn't know the background, or that it was a Latin word, but I know that when I said it or when I read it, I thought engineer to myself because it kind of rhymes a little bit, which makes sense if that's the Latin form of the word. Cool backstory. Okay. So one of the things that you guys apparently do very well is class 3 medical devices. Can you walk us through maybe one of the significant challenges a project, without giving away any confidential details, of course, and how you were able to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, so class 3 devices is pretty much what I was working on from the beginning. All these initial devices that I had been working on were all implants. So mostly stents. This is my personal background. Nitinol stents, catheters. The first company I was working for was neurovascular brain aneurysm products. And so that was kind of, where I cut my teeth in the development of medical devices. One of the interesting things about class 3 devices, as it relates to, requirements, as it relates to regulations, is that, to me, it's almost simpler of a thought process, because, there's requirements and there's, the FDA design controls or whatever, and you just do all of it. You just do everything. There's not a lot of thought to it. Sometimes it's just like, it's class 3. We just have to do everything. And so where's the FDA guidance for what biocomp you have to do? Okay, we just do everything, right? And so one of the neat things about that as a first experience is that you get experience doing everything, right? You got to do all the different tests, all the different things are kind of the most stringent from an engineering standpoint and testing standpoint. And it gives you kind of an exposure to all the different things. So if somebody comes by and says, "Oh, we have a class 2 device," my reaction is always, good. What can we eliminate? What can we not have to do, right? Because you don't have to do as much for the other stuff. It's harder to go in the other direction. I worked with people who've, started off kind of in class 1 or other things. And, they're a little unfamiliar with like all the things you have to do and the requirements. So it's always easier to pare it down. And so it's a matter of getting experience with what all those boxes you need to check are. And then once you do that a few times, it becomes relatively predictable, I guess.
And for those who don't have experience in medical devices, there's class 1, 2, and 3 medical devices, which each carry a different level of risk for the patient. Class 1 may be like a Band-Aid, right? It's very, very low risk. Class 2 might be something like a laparoscopic device or a surgical instrument. And then class 3 is typically or maybe always some kind of life-sustaining product. So the most risk to a patient.
Yeah, it would be devices that are highest risk, which, generally would be things that are treating life-threatening conditions, implants, things that are, permanently implanted into the body, things that have, I guess, scenarios where, severe things can happen to you if something goes wrong. Most of the ones that I've worked on have been either vascular or ophthalmology. So I've got a lot of experience in like in the neuro and sort of vascular stents and catheters, and then a ton of work in ophthalmology, and a lot of the ophthalmology stuff is in class 3. But I have had an opportunity to work on quite a few different implants in class 3 devices in the ophthalmology world as well. So it's not life threatening, but it is vision threatening, and so that ends up being high risk.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've worked with a lot of these medical device startup companies, and as you mentioned, not all of them stick around long term, right? It's a treacherous environment, and only a few actually make it to commercialization. What are some of the key factors that contribute to successful commercialization of one of these medical devices?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. There's so many different factors that impact the success. I can talk, I think more to the technical factors than I would to talk to the other factors, because there's business factors, there's a market, there's reimbursement, there's regulatory risk, there's all these different things that will dictate whether you can have the perfect product that works amazingly, and one of these other things ends up throwing you off, right? IP. So there's all these different things that can impact you. I think I'll focus on the technical risks. Generally speaking, you do need to have a good understanding of the market for your product from a user standpoint and from a business standpoint to properly design the product. I think one of the issues I see with startup companies that I think they get too far down a path before they really understand those two things, both, how the user is going to use this, how they're going to interact with it, and how are, they going to get paid to use it, or is the device going to get sold? And, and because those economic factors and those usability factors dictate your design so much, right? So like if somebody comes to me and they say, we can sell this device for $1,000, there's reimbursement, and here's the 3 surgeons that you need to talk to because they'll tell you everything about how to use it, I would be very confident that I could come up with a set of requirements to design a device for them, right? Because I know how they want to use it, the unmet clinical needs, and I also know what my constraints are from a manufacturing and cost standpoint, right? But if you don't do that, if you don't talk to those surgeons about the usability or use cases of the device, and you don't have the economic factors, and you just focus on the technical problems, and you solve something in a certain way, you could end up farther down the path, and it's unviable from a business standpoint, or it's unviable from a surgical procedural standpoint. And then you have to go back and unravel those things. And, people come to us and say, oh, we want to get the cost down. It's like, you guys have already raised $10 million and you've already done 100 patients. It's a little late for that. Like, it's not too late, but could have been considered sooner. I think I always, advocate for taking consideration of the cost of making something right away in the design. You don't necessarily need to hit that cost target for a while, but we see devices, we see clients of all different stages, some of which come here with they've already poured the concrete, they already have the rebar in, the foundation, and they're asking us to redo the floor plan. And it's like, well, it's a little late for that. We can be done, but it's difficult. And so those are the things that really, I think, impact, again, from a technical perspective, because I can't really speak to all the other factors in question, that really dictate whether or not that product is going to succeed through the milestones it needs to effectively in the early stages, and then also in the long run, right? So we didn't even talk about the clinical studies and the outcomes. There's a whole nother conversation about what makes it successful in commercial once you've have the design finalized and you've gone through all the testing and you're ready to launch it. That's a whole nother conversation. And maybe that's a follow-on question here, but those are different factors. And that's a different approach too, because you don't have as much freedom to change things. And so I've seen products go through all the validations, go through the clinical trials, and they succeed well. And then they get acquired. And then 6 months later, the acquirer takes the product off the market. And you're just like, we spent 8 years on this. The data was good. Why aren't they selling this? Why aren't they selling this more? Why did they take it off the market? And there was usually something, that changed. Market factors changed or business factors changed. But sometimes it's technical things changed. Femtosecond lasers come out, and now you don't need this other thing, right? We had this other thing, and now we don't need it because there's a new technology that is now better. That's another reason to not be able to predict, whether it's going to be commercially successful or not.
Yeah. One of the questions I often ask guests on this show is, what are some of the biggest problems that engineering teams commonly fall into? And one of the most common answers is not understanding the problem well enough. And what I really like about what you just said is you have elaborated on that beyond just a technical standpoint, right? It's not just understanding the problem from a technical standpoint, but it's understanding the business context around that problem as well. You mentioned speaking with the surgeons, the physicians early on, understanding how they want to use it. You could solve a problem technically, but maybe not hit the mark as far as the specific methodology with which the surgeons want to use this thing. So understanding the problem is more than just understanding the engineering problem. There's a whole context of different problems out there that are important for the engineers and the team doing the product development to understand.
Yeah, there's a game theory to it a little bit as well. I mean, I'm not that well versed in the game theory, but if you're talking about startups and going up levels, you have to reach sort of a milestone or a threshold, in your achievement, right? So, I think one of the issues is you could raise a small amount of money and develop a prototype and show that to investors, and they're like, oh, that's great. Let's invest more money. And then you take that to the clinic and you do some clinical studies. And then they're like, wow, the data looks great. Okay, let's raise some big money, right? Those are kind of like your levels, like that you're getting up as you're sort of verifying your design works, as you're verifying that you can make it, as you're verifying that it has viability, all these stages, right? What I see happen a lot in startup companies is, like you said, you got to focus on the problem you're trying to solve and all the different elements of that problem. But you also have to make sure that you're solving it just well enough to get to the next stage, because it doesn't make sense investing $50,000 in an injection molding tool for a prototype that's going to change in 2 weeks, right? And you might have a limited amount of funds, and you're like, okay, I got this pot of money that I need to spend, and I need to play it on certain cards, and I need to pay it on all the right ones. If I put it all in one bucket and I don't save any for this over here, then I can't get to the next level, right? I can't get to the next stage. So from an engineering standpoint, it's extremely critical to be quite selective about how you spend that money. And so we're advising clients often about that. Like, they come to me and they say, yeah, Andy, I only have $5,000 for this project. And I say, oh, okay. You just want a small little prototype? And they're like, no, I want a real full prototype. And I'm just like, well, it's going to be a little more than that. And they say, well, I've already spent $20,000 on IP. And I'm just like, you haven't built anything yet. Why have you spent $20,000 on IP? You should be, building something, verifying that the design is actually promising, and then, learning from that, and then, patenting it as you go along, right? As you learn more things. You spent your, these are, inventors and people who maybe don't have a full view of the process, and trying to go all into one element, right? And they've got this IP. They're like, yeah, this IP is really strong, and I'm very proud of it, and I want to develop this further. And I said, well, it's hard now because you're not willing to spend what you need to spend on some of these other things. If you would have spent $10,000 on IP and saved $15,000 for a prototype, you'd be much farther along at this point, and your patent would be better too. So those are things that we talk about constantly. Not just about how much; it's about how much, where, and when, and the timing of it. It's okay. Sometimes we do some quick and dirty, certain things in part of the design, and then we do some other things really, really thoroughly, because we know that those are really important to get to the next stage, and then we know we're going to go back and readdress. The common thing that happens in sort of the stenting world is that you spend all your money on the stent and you don't spend as much on the delivery system, and then you get to the next stage and then you can work on the delivery system. But I have seen people not balance that correctly and maybe spend not enough on the delivery system or none on the delivery system, and then they end up running into problems later. So it's all about leveling up, right, and getting to the next milestone and doing just enough to get there. Because if you raise too much money, then you end up diluting yourself too much anyway, and so you don't want to raise too much. You'd want to optimize that path, right? And so it's different for every project, though. That's what's complicated about what we do.
Yeah, and going back to the IP, something that we've run into is a customer will get a patent, and then unfortunately and unnecessarily in many cases, they're kind of locked into a technical path that maybe is not the best technical path because that's how they wrote the patent. Yeah. When if they would have focused on developing the prototype first and proving out the technology, they may have learned earlier on, oh, okay, path A is actually not the best way to get there. We should do path B and then go write the patent for path B. But we have customers occasionally who have a patent already. They come to us, they say, let's develop this thing, and we start working on it. We say, hey, I know you wrote the patent this way, but really this other way is a better way to do it. And sometimes they say, no, we can't do it that way because of the patent. Which is unfortunate because it just leads to an inferior product.
Yeah, and sometimes it's coupled with sort of a non-invented here syndrome that you have with really strong-minded, strong-willed inventors, and they have a vision for something, and they want you to carry out their vision. And in some cases, they're right-minded and they do have a vision, and we can't totally understand it. And so one of the balancing acts is when an inventor comes to us or an early stage company or a doctor and they have an idea, it's important to, I hate to say the word humor them, but sometimes it's like they don't necessarily have a knowledge of, manufacturing, for example, right? Like this cannot be made, or right now we don't know how you would make this, but we're not going to, condescend to you about, oh yeah, I can't believe you guys filed this patent. This is impossible to make. We want to see the positive of their vision, right? And steer them into a path that we think is viable on the areas that we're the expert. So you're the expert in surgery, you're the expert in your field of medicine, and you have this vision for this product, and I'm an expert in design and development and manufacturing of medical devices. And so let's figure out if we can't merge these two things together. And that's the tact I usually take to kind of push them off of being locked into something that like it may not be viable from an actual manufacturing standpoint, or we think is going to be too onerous of a development path. Sometimes the devices are extremely complicated, and we're like, well, what are the main key points? Can we dial it down for the first prototype, and we can focus on stuff that we can prove and we can show, and generally they come around. I don't have a lot of client examples where they were just so hell bent on doing what was in the patent or what they had in their mind. They're generally convinced with results. So if they want to have something that's successful and works, so if you can work with them and acknowledge the thought process that they have and sort of direct them in a route that will solve both issues, then it's usually a great result. I think what ends up happening, which I see on the engineering side, and it's part of like the makeup, I guess, of an engineer. An engineer is trained and sort of constantly looking for faults. So as an engineer, you look at something and you say, okay, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with this, right? That's horrible. It's horrible salesmanship. It's horrible business, right? To tell the client immediately when you meet them how crappy their idea is. But often engineers are unable to, restrain themselves, and the first thing out of their mouth is, "Well, you can't do that," and so it's a balancing act, right? It's taking on the information and acknowledging the ingenuity or whatever that they're coming up with, and also gaining their respect for what we can do without insulting their idea, right? So I think that's what happens when people get locked into a patent. Right. Is the engineer immediately starts criticizing it, and then the engineer, then the client is more likely to hold it tighter and be more defensive, and so we try not to attack in those situations.
I had an experience many years ago where a customer that we were working with, we were basically their engineering team. And they sold or they licensed the product we had developed for them to a much larger company who was going to help take it to the next level and sell and distribute it. And part of that effort was they were going to make some design for manufacturability improvements to this prototype that we had designed for them. And I was in the meeting there as our customer's engineering representative. And the CEO of this company who had licensed the product, he walks in and there's a room full of their engineers, right? And this is kind of a kickoff meeting to look at the design and decide, all right, what changes should we make? What's the low hanging fruit here? And I'll never forget. I thought this was such an astute way to form the conversation. The CEO says to all of his engineers, now look, this prototype that they've designed, this is their baby. So yes, we're going to look for areas to make improvements, but be kind in what you say and realize how much thought and effort and time that they've put into this. This is their baby. So let's just keep that in mind as we take the next step and help improve this for manufacturing and all that stuff. And I thought, wow, what a great way to contextualize this conversation. And it went well after that. It was successful getting it into mass production and everything.
Yeah, that's a good.
I thought that was a great way to frame that kind of conversation.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Well, let me take a very short break here and share that the Being an Engineer podcast is brought to you by Pipeline Design and Engineering, where we don't design pipelines, but we do help companies develop advanced manufacturing processes automated machines and custom fixtures, complemented with product design and R&D services. Learn more at teampipeline.us. The podcast is also sponsored by The Wave, an online platform of free tools, education, and community for engineers. Learn more at thewave.engineer. Today we have the privilege of speaking with Andy Schieber. So Andy, tell us a little bit about what do you see as the future of medical device innovation, particularly in the areas of neurovascular and ophthalmic devices, since you have great expertise in those areas. What changes or advancements should we expect to see?
Yeah, there's some exciting things happening in those areas. I think, it's difficult without disclosing confidential information, right? So we do a lot of work with early, stage startups that are, hopefully making it to the next stage and becoming successful. And along the way, we learn about the different areas. And we've worked a lot in glaucoma and cataract surgery and retinal surgery. And so there's definitely a whole array of exciting stuff happening in those areas. Some of those kind of industries, I guess, in the ophthalmology world have had a lot of developments and a lot of successful developments over the past, 30, 40 years. And so it's in some cases, it's hard to visualize like what advances, that can be made. I'm not in the IOL business, so I'm not, working on intraocular lenses, per se. I know there's always advances going on in that realm. We're working mostly on surgery. One of the more exciting things that I've worked on and I think is going to revolutionize eye care is some of the stuff that's going on with stem cells and gene therapy for retinal diseases. We've had the privilege to work on several different devices for injection of gene therapy or stem cells, both in liquid form and in these little polymer matrix devices that basically regenerate cells in the retina and in some cases reverse blindness. Those are pretty science fiction, if you ask me. We're just working on the delivery systems, right? We're working on the needles and the delivery systems for getting the treatment to the area. The work that's being done with those, those things are happening at, Johns Hopkins and other universities, University of Iowa, that, is really groundbreaking. University of Colorado, I think, is also involved. So there's multiple universities who are working on sort of that core technology, that stem cell and gene therapy. And we're not drug people or biotech people necessarily. We're working on medical devices, but that's an exciting area that I'm looking forward to seeing what's happening with that in 10, 20 years and how that relates to the those types of diseases. Other ophthalmology, cataract surgery is always a big area of interest in the industry. I think there's some exciting things happening in cataract surgery and in the IOL business in terms of improving the procedure and my parents are getting close to that age of needing cataract surgery and just in the period of time that I've been in this industry, cataract surgery has is even more smooth and quick and easy. I mean, these procedures take in some cases 5 minutes, and the IOLs that are being put in are in some cases his vision is never better than when they get cataract surgery. They maybe wore glasses their whole lives and now they're getting these IOLs and their vision is extremely crisp. So those are and that's getting better, right? That's improving. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of hidden under the confidentiality realm, but there's a lot of stuff going on in that area. And then the third area that I've had a lot of personal experience with is glaucoma. The device that I worked on, the Hydrus Microstent, has been commercial for like almost 5 years now. And there's more advances I think to come in the glaucoma world. More devices that are sort of in the pipeline, so to speak, that are going to even more improve the I guess ease of treatment and reduce. And again, one of the things that we do a lot of is reduce the invasiveness of surgery. So you might have a treatment that works, but it's extremely invasive or very surgical. And I think a big movement in all these, I think the commonality of all these things is that they're moving towards procedures that are a lot easier to recover from, a lot easier to perform, and a lot easier to target the area that you need to target without collateral damage, without having a big open surgery in your eye or a big open surgery in your body. So minimally invasive types of techniques. Converting this catheter stenting kind of concept from just being a vascular thing to being something that you do in the eye, something that you do in the ear, something that you do in, pretty much anywhere in the body. It could be a small tube or a small catheter could deliver, the stent or the agent that you might need to do the procedure.
Yeah, great. How about advice for engineers who are looking to get into medical devices? Of course, the typical engineering skill set, kind of the fundamentals, the core engineering skills are required. But outside of, let's just call it what you learn at school and maybe even some basic on-the-job learning, what do you think are some important skills or behaviors that are important specifically to medical device development?
Yeah, I can be a little bit of a contrarian when it comes to like paths, right? Because I do have a unique path. I went from, farm kid to, startup companies in the Minneapolis business culture. Like couldn't be two different worlds, right? Small farming community of 1,200 people to, a high dollar invested startup community in medical devices. And that's what I recommend. I mean, and you don't hear that from people. You're like, oh, you just graduated. You should get a job at, Medtronic and really cut your teeth on medical devices and really learn about all the different. No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't do that. You should find a path that allows you to do whatever you want, and make as many mistakes as you can with people that are willing to take risks. And those larger companies in the medical device field, they are making amazing products and they're doing, wonderful things for our industry and for patients. But they're also, conservatively protecting the work that they're doing, rightfully so, and not necessarily taking a lot of risk to develop some sort of disruptive technology that might cannibalize their own products, right? So you see that happening from, surgeons and from startup companies primarily. And so if you're interested in medical devices or if you're interested in automotive, work, or if you're interested in any area, really, my advice is to get into something that is, innovative and different than the established industry. And that is, again, a little bit the opposite of what most people will tell you to do. But I think that's where you'll see some new things because you're, 22 years old, you just graduated, you have no idea how medical devices are developed. Good. You can do things that nobody else would do because they're tied to what they think you have to do. And I got this lecture from my first boss. I got a job offer from Starfire Medical, which was the little startup company. And then I got another job offer. It was an internship with an opportunity to be hired at Boston Scientific at the same time. And all the people at the startup company that I was working for came from Boston Scientific, and I accepted the job there. And they're just like, what are you doing? Why are you accepting a job here? I'm like, what do you mean? Don't you want me to work here? And they said, well, I just thought, we heard you got a job offer at Boston Scientific. Why wouldn't you take that? And I said, well, I'm going to do a lot more cool stuff here, aren't I? And they're like, yeah, of course you are. I'm like, well, then that's the answer. But they just, they were kind of used to thinking that, some young person who's trying to get into industry would want to go to the established route. And I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in what, the startup company was doing. So I was focused on, what Starfire was doing. I thought what they were doing was really cool. And I walked in and I saw the cubicles and I saw the big company and I'm just like, I don't really want to be in this. I'd rather be at this little place, kind of doing a little dabbling in a lot of different things. And what that allowed me to do was obviously, work above, way above my pay grade from day one, right? Being in meetings with, C-level executive people, meeting doctors as a 22-year-old, doing wet labs and all this sort of thing that you don't get the opportunity to do if you're at the big organization. but it also gave me the opportunity to work on a lot of different stuff. Usually in the bigger organizations, you get sort of, pushed into one, specialization. A lot of specializations. In order to be efficient, these big organizations need to be specialized. And so you'll be in the remediation department, dealing with complaints for 3 years. It's really hard and very competitive to be in the new product development area of Medtronic. Like if you were working in the new technology innovation sector of that company, like that's elite, people, and it would be impossible to get into right away, right? And so you're going to be stuck in, the quality engineering department or something for a while, and then you're going to lose your passion for it. By the time you have enough experience to do it, it's, and I'm going to say it's too late, but it's harder. It's harder to get that back. It's harder to get that, we're so sort of naive and exuberant about doing, we're going to change the world. We're going to design new products. Yes. And then somebody hands you an FMEA spreadsheet and says, here, do this for the next 6 weeks. You're just like, oh, I thought we were doing fun stuff, right? So I think that's my advice. And people don't know how to get into startups, and that's a whole other question. But that would be my advice in terms of sort of a philosophy. And then there's specific, I think, techniques and pieces of advice to actually do that.
Well, we might have to have the second interview where we talk about how to get into startups and get your foot wet in that area. But let me ask you one more question, and then we'll wrap things up here. What's one thing that you have done or seen to accelerate the speed of engineering?
That's a really good question for us, because it's one of our our primary goals. We have designed our organization to be almost entirely project based. Most companies have a discipline managed organization, which means you have a manufacturing department, and you've got a marketing department, and you've got an R&D department, right? And the heads of those departments are managing those department budgets. And there's projects that are multidiscipline teams that are working in all of those departments, right? But the person who's in charge is the discipline manager, the VP of R&D. He has the power, not the project manager for Project X. As a client-based business, we have to be project focused, right? But a lot of project focused businesses that I've seen are still managed traditionally. So what we try to do to speed things up is to be as project focused from an organizational standpoint as we can, meaning that there should be as little hurdles and restrictions within our organization on the resources that are working on your project. So if you hire us to do a project and we say, okay, these are the 3 engineers, or there's 2 engineers and a technician that we want to work on your project, there should be no hurdles or roadblocks in that and structure and stuff that's going to prohibit them from just doing the work that you want them to do. So a lot of times we talk about what the queue looks like, and how backed up we are, how fast things are going to take, how many hours are going to take, and the people who have power are the people who are prioritizing the whole project list in those situations, like the discipline, like I was talking about. But in our situation, it's the project people who are in power. So it's I need this stuff done today. This is a timeline. We're getting it done today. So it is a philosophy and structure of our organization that makes everything focused on hitting the client deadline. So that's kind of the organizational way that we do that, right? So we function more as a resource for the organization we're working for than as a resource within our organization. So those people are usually working very closely with the people that are managing them on the client side, or one of us, one of our senior principal partners or whatever is managing the project very closely with the client, so that everything is being pushed that way. On the ground, though, within the project, the other way that we accelerate things is the practical way that we execute each task, meaning that we try to do a lot of stuff in-house. We have a lot of capabilities in-house. We have a lot of capabilities in terms of expertises and resources. I mean, you know, we're a small company. we've got about 20 full-time people and another 30 consultants. We try to always have the core answers internally and not be relying on a long series of queues from other vendors. Like, oh, we're waiting for these parts from over here, and then they're going through this process over here. Then we got to send them out to this test lab, and they got to get inspected over here. Then that adds to the timeline, right? So if we can do all that internally as much as possible, then we can, we can manage things very dynamically for the client. So that's another way we do it on the ground. And then there's a whole myriad of examples I could go through to push that point. But that's our focus, right? That's the number one thing that we try to do is be responsive, because startup companies are on a time crunch more so than anything else.
Yeah, terrific. All right, Andy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. We have a website, Ingenarious.com. We have the ability to quote parts for injection molding, silicone molding, machining, 3D printing, assembly, water jet cutting directly on our website. So you can see the link there on the front page of the website. We're also selling some products now on Chamfer that we're manufacturing. Chamfer is a website that has a whole catalog of components. We're making some components through our job shop on Chamfer. So there's a link on our website for that. And you can see our store. There will be, in the next few months, there will be a few dozen different components, strain relief, seals, different things that are very commonly used in our industry that we felt like there was a need to have some off-the-shelf parts for. So we invested in molds and started making some of those parts and are selling them there. And lastly, you can find our company or me personally on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Andy Schieber is my name and profile, and Ingenarious has a page on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. And let me know if you guys are needing our help.
Terrific. Andy, thank you so much again. We'll include all of those links in the show notes, of course. And what a pleasure it was to have you on the show today.
Yep, the pleasure was mine. Thank you.
I'm Aaron Moncur, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing advanced manufacturing processes, automated machines, and custom fixtures, complemented with product design and R&D services, visit us at teampipeline.us. To join a vibrant community of engineers online, visit thewave.engineer. Thank you for listening.